There is a stone standing in a field in Sweden that has been there for 1,000 years. It is taller than a man, covered in carved serpents and faded red paint, and it says, in letters that almost nobody alive can read anymore, the name of a man who died far from home, in a country that no longer exists, on an expedition that history forgot entirely. No chronicle recorded his death. No saga named him. The only reason anyone knows he existed is because a craftsman with iron chisels and a steady hand spent 2 days carving his name into granite at a Swedish roadside, painted it red so travelers could read it from a distance, and then rode on to the next grieving family. That craftsman was you. And this is what that life actually looked like. The apprenticeship. You grow up in Upland, the flat lake-threaded country north of what will one day become a capital city, though you will never know that. Your father shapes iron at a forge outside a farmstead. Your mother's hands card wool and knead bread and trace the carved patterns on the doorpost of your longhouse the way other people trace the faces of their children. The carvings mean something. Everyone in Upland knows this. Not everyone can say exactly what, but the knowledge that they mean something is enough to make people lower their voices around them. And it is enough to make a 7-year-old boy pick up his father's chisel one afternoon and understand that this is the thing he will do with his life. You seek out Åsmund because of a stone you heard about when you were 12, one raised by a man named Varin for his dead son, down in the south, unlike any other stone anyone had seen, where every runestone gives you a name, a relationship, and a prayer. Varin's stone gives you riddles. It circles something enormous. A father's grief so vast it exceeded the memorial formula entirely and spilled into mythology, into cosmology, into questions that will be argued over for 1,000 years without resolution. You heard about that stone and never stopped thinking about it. You wanted to understand what kind of hands could make something like that. Åsmund's hands, people said. So you found Åsmund. He is not warm. He is precise, which is the more useful quality in a teacher and the less enjoyable one in a human being. He takes you on because your father fixes his tools for free and because your hands, as he puts it, are not completely useless. The highest praise you will receive from him for the next 3 years. The first lesson is not about runes, it is about stone. Åsmund walks you to a granite outcrop at the edge of a field and makes you press both palms flat against it and stand there until you understand something. You stand there for what feels like an embarrassingly long time. Eventually, you understand that granite is indifferent to you in a way that wood and iron are not. Wood can be split, iron can be remelted. Make a mistake in granite, and the mistake lives there long after you are ash. Åsmund watches your face, and when he sees the understanding arrive, he says, "Good." Then he hands you a chisel and tells you to cut a line. The line is terrible, and he shows you exactly why, and you cut another. And this rhythm of failure and correction repeats with the patience of a tide coming in for the better part of 6 months, until the lines stop being terrible and start being merely poor, which Åsmund treats as meaningful progress, and which you have learned to accept as the closest thing to celebration you are going to get from this man. What you also learn, without being explicitly taught, is how to read a boulder before you touch it. Not every stone is suitable, and a carver who picks the wrong one loses weeks of work to a hidden fault that announces itself only after the 3rd day of cutting. You learn to look for granite with a tight, even grain, predictable under the chisel, hard enough to hold a clean line for centuries. Sandstone carves more easily, and you will use it when a family cannot afford the time that granite demands, but sandstone weathers. In 50 years, a sandstone inscription softens. In 200, it whispers. In 500, it is essentially gone. Granite keeps, which matters enormously to families who are paying for permanence. Your first real decision on any commission happens before you lift a tool. It happens when you walk the land around the farmstead, looking for the right stone. The runes come after the line. There are 16 of them in the runic alphabet your world uses, and you know them the way you know your own name. But knowing a rune and carving a rune are entirely different things. What you learn above everything else is spacing. The runic text runs along the body of a serpent, a great sinuous shape that frames the stone, and you must plan the entire inscription before the first cut. You lay it out in charcoal along the serpent's body, and if you arrive at the prayer with 3 words remaining and space for 2, the problem cannot be solved at that point. The problem was made 20 letters earlier, and all you can do is stand there appreciating, with exceptional clarity, exactly where things went wrong. This teaches you something about mistakes that has nothing to do with stone. By the time you notice them, they are usually very old. By the time Åsmund considers you ready, you have also absorbed something he never explicitly taught, the weight behind the craft itself. In the old understanding that runs beneath this world like groundwater, the runes were not invented, they were found. The old god hung upside down from the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights, staring into the void, and what he found there, at the cost of that suffering, were the letters waiting in the darkness. That story makes your craft something more than stone cutting. A rune carved wrong is not a minor error. It is a rune that does not work. Whether you fully believe this in the year 1020, when the new religion's priests are raising churches in towns your grandfather knew as pagan market squares, is a question you have learned to find more comfortable left unanswered. You are 22 when Osman sends you north along the lake roads with a set of iron chisels and the observation that your serpent tails still need work. This is your territory now, a circuit of farmsteads and market towns that you will work for the next 30 years. Your name traveling ahead of you until families know to send for you by name when someone important dies. The formula is almost always the same. So-and-so raised this stone in memory of so-and-so, who was his father, his brother, his lord. May God help his soul. You have carved these words so many times that they have become shapes rather than meanings. The way a word repeated too often stops sounding like a word. The formula is a container. Your job is to fill it correctly and cut it cleanly, and most of the time that is sufficient. But the people on the other side of the table are not reciting a formula. They are trying to compress a person they loved into a sentence that will carry the weight of memory for as long as the stone stands, which, if the stone is good granite and the carving is deep, is effectively forever. You write the names on birch bark first, then walk the land until you find the right stone and sketch the serpent in charcoal before making a single permanent cut. You read the inscription back to the family and wait while they decide if it sounds like him. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes a son corrects a word, and sometimes a widow simply cries and says, "Yes, that's right, that's him." And you fold the birch bark and begin. The complication arrives, as complications tend to, on what should have been a straightforward commission. A farmer outside a lake town has died and left two sons, and both of them are standing on either side of you while you work, and they cannot agree on the wording. The elder wants the stone to say their father was generous. The younger says he was not generous, he was fair, which is a different thing entirely. And the younger son has apparently been waiting some years to say so. They argue across your work as though you are a piece of furniture, which in this moment you essentially are. You keep your face neutral and your charcoal ready. Eventually, you suggest he kept his word, which is true enough by any account, satisfies neither son completely, and more importantly fits the space available on the serpent. They accept it. You cut it. It is not a perfect inscription. It is a functional one. On the long ride home, you think about all the stones you have carved that told a partial truth about a person, and you decide that partial truths are still better than silence, which is what those men would have gotten if you had refused to simplify, and which is what they will get eventually anyway, once enough years have passed. You have come to understand, the only man in the valley who reliably profits from bad news. You try not to dwell on this. The painting takes half a day after the carving. The finished stone is not gray. This surprises people when they watch you work. It is red and black and white, the carved lines filled with iron oxide and oil, so that the serpent blazes against the stone's face, visible from the road at 100 paces. The stone is raised at a crossroads or a river ford, somewhere the whole district travels, because a runestone no one can read from the road is a stone that has failed at its only purpose. Visibility is the entire point. The name must be seen. The name, once seen, persists. The gray, weathered monuments that future people will photograph and call ancient and mysterious are just your work with all the colors stripped away by 1,000 years of rain. And what those people will feel when they stand in front of them, that unnamed weight they cannot explain, is the ghost of paint, the Ingvar stones. For years the commissions arrive in the ordinary rhythm of a province's grief. A landowner here, a farmer there, the occasional bridge builder whose family wants the province to know what he contributed. One autumn, the rhythm changes. The stones begin arriving differently, more of them, from the same direction, all asking for the same closing line. He went east, he did not return. Ingvar was a leader, a young man from a good family who gathered ships and men and sailed east, down the great river roads toward the Caspian Sea, sometime around the year 1036. He brought with him an expedition that stripped young men from farmsteads all across upland, promising the things such leaders always promise: silver, glory, and the return journey. The silver and glory were apparently real for a while. The return journey was not. The riders begin arriving at farmsteads across upland in the early 1040s, and the commissions reach you shortly after. The first stone you carve for one of Ingvar's men is for a family whose son was 20 years old. Strong, they tell you, cheerful, good with horses. You write the name on birch bark, find the right granite, sketch the serpent, and cut the inscription with the care you bring to every stone. He died in the east, far from home. You paint it red and ride on. The second stone is 3 days away. The third follows. Then you lose count. There will be around 26 stones raised for the men of that expedition across the province, and you will carve a significant share of them. What killed them is not entirely clear. Disease, almost certainly. The kind that moves through a camp of men far from home and takes them faster than any battle would. No body to bury, no possessions returned, no account of where exactly the earth received them. Just the family's grief and the formula and the chisel, repeated until the formula is the only solid thing left in any of it. By the 12th or 13th stone, you have stopped listening to the descriptions of the dead the way you once did. Not because you don't care, but because you have run out of the particular interior space that caring requires, and because the descriptions have begun to sound like one another in the way that all grief, at sufficient volume, eventually does. There will be around 26 stones for Ingvar's men. You will never carve one for Ingvar himself. Nobody knows exactly where he ended up, which means nobody can commission the stone, which means the man who led the whole expedition into oblivion is the only one the province cannot formally mourn. You find this fitting in a way you cannot entirely explain. The understanding arrives slowly, over the last miles of a long ride home, that you have been the last person to make these men legible to the world. The expedition produced no written account, no chronicle, no saga ever named it as a triumph worth recording, because it was not a triumph. The only evidence that any of these young men existed, the only thing that will survive long enough for anyone to ask questions, is a series of carved granite stones standing at roadsides across the province. You were present for none of their deaths. You never met most of them. But their permanence, such as it is, for as long as the granite holds, passed through your hands. This is not a comfortable thought. It is, however, an accurate one. The cross. The religious shift has been coming for years, and you have watched it the way you watch weather building over the lake. Inevitable, gradual, not something a craftsman has the luxury of having strong opinions about. The old temples are converted or torn down. Men who swore oaths to the old powers are swearing new ones to the new god, and finding, as men always do, that the mechanism of oath-swearing adapts considerably faster than the beliefs underneath it. The first time a family asks you to carve a cross on the stone, you carve it without ceremony. You are not a theologian. The cross is a shape. Shapes are what you do. The trade has been thinning alongside all of this. Not because people stop dying, which remains one of the few things you can count on, but because the New World has its own memorial forms now. Church burial, Latin inscriptions, stone slabs and building floors where only the right people will ever read them. The runestone at a crossroads for any passing farmer to read is an older idea. The young men who might have apprenticed under you are learning the church's stonework instead. You can feel the waterline receding a little further back each season, and there is nothing to be done about it except keep working for as long as the work comes. The commission that stays with you is from a widow who wants both. A cross in the center of the stone, a prayer to God in the inscription, and then quietly, almost as an afterthought, as if asking you to add an extra line at no charge, the old protective mark, the one her mother used, the one that goes back further than anyone alive can trace. You look at her for a moment. She looks back at you with the expression of a woman who has decided that in a time of profound religious transition, covering several spiritual possibilities at once is not unreasonable. And if God and the old powers have a problem with the arrangement, they are welcome to take it up with each other. You carve the cross. You carve the prayer. And in the tail of the serpent, where most people will not look closely, you carve the old mark. The stone will stand for 900 years. Scholars will argue about that mark. They will publish papers. Nobody will entirely agree on what it means. The widow, you think, would find this very satisfying. The last stone. You are old by the standards of your world, which means you are somewhere past 50 and your hands ache in cold weather in a way that is clearly not going to improve. Your last commission is a modest stone. A woman in a village you have passed through a dozen times over 30 years, raising a memorial for her brother who died in the winter. Nothing remarkable about the stone. Nothing remarkable about the inscription. You have carved this formula so many times that your hands barely need your eyes anymore, which is either mastery or something close enough to it that the distinction has stopped mattering. You finish the carving in 2 days. On the third morning, you mix the paint and fill the lines, and you stand back and look at the stone in the autumn light. The serpent is good. The letters are clean and evenly spaced. The cross in the center is the best cross you have ever carved, which is a strange thing to take pride in given that you spent the first half of your life carving the other symbols. But here you are, and there it is. And it is good work. No one will raise a runestone for it. This is simply the arithmetic of the trade. The carver's name sometimes appears on the stone, and you have signed your work when the commission was fine enough to warrant it, and those signatures will outlast you by a margin the mind cannot comfortably hold. Some person 1,000 years from now will read your name in granite and wonder who you were. They will find no answer because the stone gives them the name and nothing else, which is, when you think about it, exactly what you gave every family who ever hired you, a name in stone. The rest is silence and weather and whatever the rain decides to leave behind. You pack your chisels into their leather roll and tell the woman the paint will need a second coat when it dries. She thanks you and offers you bread for the road and you take it, because you have always taken what was offered. You walk out to the road and the lake is gray and flat in the morning light. And somewhere north of here, a family sent a rider last week with word of a new commission. But you think perhaps you will take the long way around. You have been in a hurry for 30 years. The stone is not going anywhere, neither for that matter are you. The runestones are still there. Roughly 6,000 survive across Scandinavia, most of them in Sweden, most of them in Upland. They stand in churchyards now, or in museum rooms, or at the edges of fields where the original roads ran. The paint is gone. The people who paid for them are gone. The men and women they commemorate are gone. The carvers who signed their names in the serpent's body, Opir, who signed around 60 stones, Fot, Bali, Asmund, are gone entirely, leaving nothing behind but the signature. I was here. I made this, remember? In the year 1041, somewhere in Upland, a craftsman with aching hands carved the name of a young man who died of disease 800 miles from home. The young man is otherwise unrecorded. The expedition that killed him is known to history only because of the stones. And the stones exist because the carver did his job. The formula worked. It just took about 1,000 years. If this one made you think, drop a comment below. Subscribe for more, and we'll see you in the next one.